Okay, so now we know that our register node route and our register nodes bulk route, they're both working correctly. So now let's put it all together and let's test our register and broadcast node route, which uses both our register node route and our register nodes bulk route. So what this endpoint will allow us to do is it will allow us to build a decentralized blockchain network, which is pretty awesome. It's going to allow us to create a network and add new nodes to that network. So let's jump right into our first example. And to show how this route works, we're going to use Postman. So in Postman, we want to make a post request to register and broadcast a node on localhost 3001. And actually, before we do this, I just want to make sure that everybody should have all 4 of their nodes running inside of your terminal in order for us to test these routes. So we want to hit localhost 3001, which is our first node, and we want to hit the register and broadcast node endpoint. So at this point, we have no network at all, right? We just have 5 individual nodes running, but they are not connected in any way. So this first call that we're going to make is simply going to connect 2 nodes together to form the beginnings of our network. So what we want to do right now is register a node with our node that's hosted on port 3001. So let's do that now. So when we hit this register and broadcast node endpoint, we have to send in a new node URL that we want to register. So let's do this now. We'll make the body, and we will say new node URL. And for this first test, we want to register our second node, hosted on 3002, with our first node. So to do that, we will just copy this text up here, and we'll paste it as our new node URL, and change it to 3002. So now when we make this request, we should register our node that's hosted on localhost 3002 with our node that's hosted on localhost 3001. Let's do this now. Cool, so it looks like it worked. It says new node registered with network successfully. So let's check that out by going to the browser. So in our browser, we have access to all 5 of our nodes that are running. What we just did is we registered our node on 3002 with our node that's hosted on localhost 3001. So if I refresh this page, I should have localhost 3002 registered in these network nodes right here because we're on localhost 3001. Let's see if that worked. Perfect. We registered localhost 3002. Now if I go over to localhost 3002, we should have localhost 3001 registered in these network nodes. Let's refresh and see what we get. Perfect. We have localhost 3001. So now these 2 nodes have formed a network, and they have registered each other as a network node. It's pretty cool. Let's add another node to this network. So here, we're going to change 3002 to 3003. And we're going to make a request to our node that's on 3001. And what this should do is register our node that's hosted on 3003 with all the other nodes in the network. So 3003 should register with 3001 and 3002. Let's send this request and see if it works. Cool. So it looks like it worked. Let's check. So on our first node, when we refresh this, we should have localhost 3003 inside of our network nodes now too. Let's see. Perfect. We have 3002 and 3003. Now, since localhost 3002 is also part of the network, it should have localhost 3003 inside of the network nodes now. Because when we made this request, even though we made it to 3001 and not 3002, 3002 is already part of the network. And the broadcast should have registered 3003 with all the network nodes. Let's see if that worked. So we'll refresh our node on 3002. Perfect. We have our third node inside of our network nodes as well now. And if we go over to our node on 3003 and we refresh this now, we should have both 3001 and our node on 3002 inside our network nodes. Let's see. Perfect. So this is working really well. We now have a network that's comprised of our nodes on 3001, 3002, and 3003. They are all registered with each other, which is pretty cool. And you can see that if we refresh 3004 or we refresh 3005, you can see that they still have no network nodes because we have not done anything with them yet. So let's go back over to Postman, and now let's register 3005 with the network. And since we have 3 nodes in this network, we can send this request to any of those nodes that are in the network. So instead of using the first node, let's go with the third node this time. Or we could go with the second node. It doesn't really matter. We'll go with the second node this time. So let's send this request. Cool. Now our node on 3005 should be registered with the network. Let's see. So if we go over to our first node and refresh, great, we have 3005 inside of our network nodes. If we go to our second node and refresh, we have 3005, perfect. Our third node, we have 3005. If we go to our fourth node, we still have no network nodes, which is good because we haven't done anything with localhost 3004 yet. And if we go to 3005, we should now have 3001, 2, and 3 inside of our network nodes. Which we do. Perfect. So now we have a decentralized network that's comprised of 4 different nodes, which is pretty cool. Let's add our 4th node to this network. So we'll head back over to Postman, and we'll put 4 right here. And this time, let's send it to localhost 3005 this time. And we'll send this request. Now over in the browser, all of these nodes should have 3004 inside of their network nodes array. Let's check. Yep, that one's good. 2. Good. 3. 3 is good. Let's go over to 5 now. Refresh. Good, we have 3004. And now 4, inside of this network nodes array, we should have registered all the other nodes, 1, 2, 3, and 5. Let's see. Perfect. We have 1, 2, 3, and 5. So you might be wondering how all of this is working, right? Because when we make this request, we are saying add 3004 to the network. But then how does 3004 become aware of the entire network from this one request? And if you remember from when we built out this register and broadcast node endpoint, there was actually a lot of calculations going on in this endpoint. So if we take a look at the code, we can see that the first thing that happens inside of our register and broadcast node endpoint is that we take in the new node URL and then we broadcast it to every single node in the network by hitting their register node endpoint. So every node in the network will become aware of the new node that's being added. Then after the broadcast takes place, we send a request to the new node that was just added, and we register all of the network nodes that are already present in the network with the new node. So this is kind of where that reverse registration takes place. At this point, all of the original nodes in the network are aware of the new node, and the new node is aware of all the other nodes in the network. So it's pretty cool. All of the nodes inside of the network become aware of each other, which is what needs to happen for our blockchain to work correctly. So this is a pretty powerful endpoint that we built out here. And actually, all three of these endpoints that we built out are pretty powerful because they work together to create a decentralized blockchain network, which is what we have right now. And it's pretty awesome. Cool. So believe it or not, at this point, we have a decentralized blockchain network. At this point, I encourage you to take some time and mess around with these endpoints a little bit and make different networks with different nodes and test it a little bit more to get more familiar with how it's all working. And I also want to mention that I realize that this section has been pretty complex and it can be a little bit confusing how everything is working together. So if you are struggling to understand exactly how all of this is working, I would encourage you to go back to the beginning of this section and go through all of the videos in this section again. You'd be surprised how much you can learn and pick up on the second time around after you already have some context for what is going to be happening and what we're going to be building out. By watching the videos a second time through, some things that might not have clicked the first time will end up making sense for you. At least, I know that's how it works for me. Cool. So that's it for this section. In the next section, we will be updating all of our code so that we can broadcast transactions and mining blocks throughout our entire decentralized blockchain network, which should be pretty cool. So I'll see you in the next section.